And there can be a lot of other needs that we need to look out for to make sure that you're able to keep the control that you need. So we're going to be talking today about control of finances and health care, as well as we will talk about wills, but we're also going to talk a lot about trust, which have become very popular these days. We're going to talk a little about prenuptial agreements, and also, as I said, long-term care asset protection. Now, so often people will tell me that they didn't get around, for so many years to contacting an attorney to talk about some of this stuff because they just don't like thinking about death and dying and all that nasty stuff. But I find that we can add a little humor to it, and it doesn't have to be all gloom and doom. And I find one of the best examples of some of the things we're going to talk about is in the old sitcom Seinfeld. And so I can have a little clip here to lighten things up.
Have you seen the movie The Other Side of Darkness?
No.
About this woman in a coma? Well, I couldn't finish watching it, so you should read this.
I, Cosmo Kramer, having just seen the movie The Other Side of Darkness, and not wanting to be in a coma like that lady in the movie, hereby want Jerry Seinfeld to remove my life support, feeding machine, lung blower, etc., etc., etc.
Can you do that for anybody?
Well, I don't know if what you have here constitutes a legally binding document.
Well, I'm gonna type it up.
Yes, well, quick, but even so, you may want to talk to a lawyer.
Well, Jackie Childs, he put a restraining order on me. I'm not allowed within 200 feet of his office. I couldn't even give him his Christmas present. Take this out of the garbage?
Yeah, it's still got some spring in the string.
Jerry, this is a piece of junk. How are you going to be the executor of my living will? You see, you can't let go.
Trust me, Kramer, given the legal opportunity, I will kill you.
I should believe you. Hey, Elaine, do you have some free time tomorrow afternoon?
Me?
Yeah, because you're perfect. You're a calculating, cold-hearted businesswoman. And when there's dirty work to be done, you don't mind stomping on toothpicks.
Come on.
Question number 4. You're breathing on your own, you're conscious, but with no muscular function.
You have a good idea to communicate.
I don't see how.
I don't like the sound of this one.
Yeah, let's pull the cord.
Yank it like you're starting a motor.
Moving on. You have liver, kidneys, and gallbladder, but no central nervous system.
Well, I gotta have a central nervous system.
Okay. 1 lung, blind, and you're eating through a tube.
No, that's not my style.
Rolling.
All right. You can eat. The machines do everything else.
I had stick.
Yeah, stick. Because I could still go to the coffee shop. Jerry, listen. I saw the rest of that movie, The Other Side of Darkness. The coma lady wakes up at the end.
I wanted to see that. Thanks a lot.
I didn't know it was possible to come out of a coma.
I didn't know it was possible not to know that. Oh, unforgivable.
She's gonna pull that through.
How's he doing?
He's been sleeping alive, still groggy.
I thought I'm moving my chair. I got him a gene pick.
What happened to Vincent?
I'm kind of off of him. On the outlet. Ah.
Making these decisions for them like Kramer did. Because, he's right. You need to have somebody who's able to make those tough decisions. And, think about the person that you've had conversations with so that they know what your wishes are. So there's a lot more to estate planning than just death. and handling the inheritance. But there are a lot of instances where you need to be able to have the legal tools available to be able to keep control while you're alive. And there are two simple documents that we have that give you an awful lot of control. And I know Wade was just asking me about, well, if I don't have a lot of property, do I need any estate planning or a will? Well, maybe not a will or anything elaborate, but you probably want to at least consider having these documents in place so that you're able to keep the control that you need. Now, we saw this happen catastrophically during COVID because of the pandemic, and people were ending up on respirators in quarantine in the hospital, and lawyers weren't able to come to them to have them sign legal documents, and the family couldn't even get in to see them. And the hospitals were requiring families to come to lawyers to go to court to get guardianships to be able to make these decisions. But really, you can avoid all of that with just these two simple documents. So one of them is called a general durable power of attorney. And it's so important to have this because it makes it so that you're able to say who you trust to be able to handle property matters for you. So if maybe you're in an accident, you're in the hospital, something has happened, you're able to have somebody who you trust be able to take care of making sure the bills are paid, that the lights are kept on, and whatever needs to be done. And then for medical decisions, we now have in Indiana an all-new document that's called an Advanced Directive for Healthcare Decisions. Now, this is all new that just happened in the last couple of years. We used to have two other documents that we don't have anymore in Indiana. One was called an Appointment of Healthcare Representative that said who you put in charge to be able to talk with the doctors if you're not able to help guide the doctors with choices of procedures in healthcare. And the other one was the living will. And most of us have heard about living wills. Well, we don't have it in Indiana. But that's not to say that we don't have something better now. Indiana's legislature got together recently and totally revamped these legal documents. And it was the first big change in over 30 years. What they found was other states in the country were looking at Indiana's legal documents and asking, what are these crazy Hoosiers doing here? Because they didn't look anything like what they're used to seeing in their hospitals. So we now have a new document that's more in line with what the rest of the country sees. And that's called an Advanced Directive for Healthcare. And what it does is it merges the old two documents together into one. So it actually has that living will built into the same document now. And it says who's in charge of being able to talk with the doctors. And maybe it's a spouse, and then it's maybe one of your kids as a backup. Or you could have multiple people in the family maybe be making that decision together. It's really whatever fits for your situation. And it keeps you from being kept alive artificially on machines if you would otherwise be dying naturally from the injuries or the illness that you're facing. And my grandmother had to have this used a few years back. And she had had a stroke, and she was in the hospital. And the doctors wouldn't talk with me. They said, because of the HIPAA laws, I can't tell you how she's doing. I said, well, can you tell me if she's alive? And they said, well, we can tell you that, but nothing else. Well, I had done these documents for her, so I knew she had them. And my dad and I went to her home, and we found them in her closet, and we went back to the hospital, and then we were able to talk with the doctors about everything. And she wasn't able to talk. She was in a coma. And the doctors said, well, we could keep her alive indefinitely, but she would have to be on a respirator in a nursing home for the rest of her life. And we all knew from talking with Grandma, she had expressed she didn't want to live that way. She wanted to die with the dignity to go to heaven and be with God, and it was the time for her to be called. So she was able to pass on, and we were able to honor her wishes that way. Now, we will talk about the inheritance. And for that, I have another very short clip for you. If I can figure out where the play button is there.
Unfortunately, we have longevity on both sides.
But what if, you guys, what if? You have to make another will. Without a will, there'll be nothing but fighting and accusations, and eventually the three of us will stop speaking to each other, and years will go by, and our children won't even know their cousins. And we'll spend holidays apart. I'll be with my husband and children, and Axel will be across town with his family, each wondering if the other is having a Merry Christmas, but each too proud to pick up the phone. And Brent, who refuses to choose sides, will be eating Christmas dinner all by himself at a Perkins restaurant, being served by a waitress who feels sorry for him. You have to make a will. Specific details, who gets what, where to tear us apart. I've seen it before. Look at Casey Kasem's family. Wait.
Friends, this happens so much. I have seen some things that would just make people just toss in their grave if they had any idea of how the family fights after they pass on. And you know, I think what it is that, you know, right after somebody passes, the family gets together and they go to the wake. And they come closer together, but then the longer that it gets drawn out, that's when people start getting a little bit greedy. And sometimes you see a troublemaker in the family, and you're all thinking who it is in your family. I know who it is in mine. And that's when they come out, they rear their ugly heads, and they start bringing up some long-held resentments that they've had. And it's best to make sure that your wishes are known so that they can be honored and the family can move on and honor your memory. And with doing that, we have some different ways of handling the inheritance. One, I told you we would talk about wills, even though they're not very common like they used to be, because we found some better solutions than wills. But a will is what most people have thought of traditionally for estate planning. And it's going to direct where the inheritance goes. And it's going to say who's going to be in charge of handling the inheritance. Now, the problem with a will is it has to be very specifically witnessed and signed in order to comply with Indiana's courts. And I've seen so many people who come to me with like a do-it-yourself will they got online or something, and it's just not going to be held up they won't hold up in court. One time I had a lady who called me, her husband had passed away, and they thought he had a will, but it turned out he never signed it, so he did not have a will. So it had to go according to Indiana's laws about who the next of kin would be. Now, wouldn't you think that a spouse would automatically inherit everything from the spouse who passed away? No, that's not how it works with Indiana's laws. So with this lady, she had a couple of college-age children, and they ended up getting half of the estate because there was no will. Fortunately, they got along with their mom, and they handed it over to her, but that might not have been the case. And do you know what happens if there are no children and there's no will? It goes to the surviving spouse's in-laws. It goes to the father-in-law and the mother-in-law. And that's usually not at all what somebody would plan to have happen when they pass away. So you want to make sure that you're able to be in charge of your wishes being honored. Now, the problem with the will is it's got to be probated in court. Now, people wonder, what does probate really mean? And it is having an attorney take the will to court before a judge to have a case opened up, to be able to unfreeze the property so that it can be handled with the inheritance. The reason that has to be done is the property becomes frozen when you die. So as soon as the family goes to the bank and they say, well, mom or dad just passed, they're going to freeze the account, and they're going to say you've got to go to a lawyer to go to court to get it unfrozen. A problem we're seeing with that more and more these days is with the funeral homes. The funeral homes used to wait to be paid. They're not waiting anymore. They're now requiring all of their money up front before they will do anything with the casket. So, you know, if the family hasn't planned ahead for that, the assets could be frozen, and the family might have to front those costs until they can get everything unfrozen. So I want to talk with you about a better solution that we've been seeing and using now. And that's with a simple revocable trust. And we often have it called a living trust. And you wonder, well, why do you call it a living trust? It's because even though you've passed away and you've died, the trust is still considered as alive. So the assets don't get frozen. And it makes it so much easier for the family. Because with that, all the family has to do is take the paperwork, go to the bank or credit union, show that to them, and then they're able to get on the account and start handling everything right away if their name is the person who's there to handle the estate. And they don't have to go to a lawyer to hire a lawyer to do anything. They don't have to go to a lawyer. They don't have to go to court to have probate open. They're able to start taking care of everything and settle it up just as quickly as they can. And another problem with that too is that with wills, you often see things tied up in probate for over a year, very commonly. And you know, the longer it's held up, the more people start squabbling and fighting. So you're able to take care of it very efficiently without there being any expense with that, because you don't have to have the family go and pay a lawyer to go to court for anything. Also, it keeps your estate private. So I had a lady who told me one time she was retired and lived out in the country and was really bored. And she told me that whenever she would see in the obituaries that somebody in town had died, she'd go to the courthouse to look up their will because she wanted to know what was going on. But she knew how easy it was to do that. She didn't want people to be able to do that when she would die. And a trust keeps all that private, so people aren't able to know your business. Now it's becoming even worse. All you have to do is get on the computer and you can get into the court's website and be able to start pulling up an awful lot of information about this. So a trust is going to give you a lot more control also. A trust can be a joint trust for both spouses. And many people think, well, can't you do that with a will? You can't. You can only have a will for one person. But with the trust, you can have it for both spouses. And you know, that makes a lot of sense. If you've been married for a while and you've got all your property held jointly, then you just want to be able to make it as simple for the surviving spouse as possible. And they really don't have to do anything. They still are able to keep that same trust. They don't have to make any changes to it. It's when the second spouse passes away, it makes it really simple for the family because they're able to start taking care of it all. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could share with us what are the criteria that help us decide whether to get a trust or a will.
Okay. He was asking, how do you decide if you need a trust or a will? And what I tell people is to look at their estate and think, well, do you have a lot of assets that you just have beneficiaries on? And if that's really all that you've got, you might be okay with just a will. But really, there's not a whole lot of difference in cost. The cost is pretty close because you've got these other things you need too, like the power of attorney, and you've got the advanced directive for healthcare decisions. So this is just a little bit extra added on with an estate plan. A trust really looks very much like a will. What it does is says where the inheritance is going to go, like a will will, and it says who's going to be in charge of handling it. For most people, I see when we talk about what a trust can do, they like that because it really makes it a much easier, efficient way to handle that estate. Also, it grows with the estate. Some people think, well, don't I have to go back and see my lawyer when I get a new house, or I open a new bank account, or buy a new car, or put that in the trust? And no, you don't. It grows with you. All you do is you let them know at the bank that you've got a trust, and they'll note that on the account, or they'll put that on the deed when you buy a new house, or when you go to the B&B when you buy a new car, you let them know that you've got a trust. And then the trust handles all of that then. And you usually have it just like you would with a will. Maybe percentages on where you want things to go, or dollar amounts, and then it's going to do what you want it to do with that. It gives you more control over the inheritance too. I handled an estate once where the man who had passed away only had a will and left everything to his 22-year-old son, left him in charge. And so half a year later, I get this kid with his baseball cap on backwards back in my office to, finally close out the estate. And I asked this kid, well, so with your father's estate, your inheritance, did you, use some of that for a down payment on a house? No. Did you buy a car with that? No. Did you talk with a financial advisor about doing something to put that in savings? And I think he kind of chuckled at that. And I go, no. And I asked him, so what do you have left out of your inheritance? Anybody want to guess? Nothing. This 22-year-old kid went through and apparently had a good time for half a year and just spent his entire inheritance and had nothing left to show for. And that could have given this kid a really good start in life. But he just wasn't mature enough to know how to handle that money responsibly. So with a trust, there are a lot of great ways that you can do that. We can do whatever you feel would be right for the family. I see a lot of people dividing it up at different percentages, at different ages. What was that, man?
Was it the drug testing clause?
The drug testing clause? That is very popular these days. So, we could do different percentages, whatever you feel would be right, at whatever ages you think would be appropriate. And the money's still there for them. It's, you would call it a trust fund, but it's nothing really fancy. It's just like having a bank account that's still with the trust name on it, that's still there or could be invested for them. But you've got somebody older and wiser managing their inheritance for them until they're old enough. Like it could be maybe an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent or a family friend that you have. And the money's still there that it can be used for any proper needs that they have, such as for educational needs, if they need braces, medical needs, for any support like car repairs and such. They just can't go and blow it at a gambling casino or go out and buy a fancy sports car and use it irresponsibly. A lot of people too are liking having a drug testing clause in there as well. What that does is it lets that, we call it a backup trustee, maybe an aunt or uncle or whoever it might be, have the discretion that if they think that somebody is struggling with a drug problem, they can make them get a drug test. And if they come up positive, then they have to get treatment and be clean for a year before they can be eligible to get their inheritance. So it gives them some protection, because if somebody's struggling with a drug problem, the worst thing we would want is for them to come into some money. It could be catastrophic because they're going to blow it on drugs. So it gives you a lot more control. Yes, sir.
Yeah, if you have included an advance directive in your trust, would you also have to identify someone to make decisions about medical decisions?
Okay. So the question is, is the advance directive something that's in the trust, and does it say who would be making those decisions? They're separate documents, separate legal documents. Like when I do an estate plan, it's a package. It's several different documents for different purposes. Like the power of attorney is its own document. The advance directive is a different document. The trust is a separate document. And you do say who you want to be in charge with those responsibilities and those roles for different decision making. But it doesn't have to be the same person. So because they're separate documents, you can have somebody else who's better suited maybe for making the medical decisions, be that person. And then if there's somebody who has a good head on their shoulders for handling finances, that might be a better person to be for the power of attorney. And then a lot of people, maybe they want their young adult children to have those responsibilities, but yet they want the inheritance held back for them until they're a little older. And you can do that with the trust that way. Okay. So I told you we talked a little bit about freedom agreements. And when I put that picture on there, it was before all the crazy stuff started happening. Ma'am, can I say?
Before you move to with the trust, what qualifies, I guess, as assets that would go into a trust?
So it can really be about anything that you can think of. I like to think of a trust as kind of like a suitcase. You can put property in it, you can take it right back out. And it could be bank accounts. It could be your automobiles. It could be your house, timeshares if you've got them. It could be any investments that you've got, any stocks or bonds. Right, I do a document that says that all of your stuff that you've got at home, like your jewelry, your furniture, any family heirlooms, the pets, the lawnmower, whatever there might be is in the trust. So it doesn't have to go through probate. Also, in the back of the trust, in my trust anyway, I like to leave a section where you can go and you could handwrite in special gifts that you might think of. Or you can do it on the computer, print it off, and keep it, attach it to it, and sign at the bottom. And so, for example, if you have like a family heirloom, a piece of jewelry, a watch, a ring, or an antique who you want your pets to be taken care of by, and maybe leave them a little bit of money for vet expenses and such, you can do that. And for those little things like that, you don't have to come back and pay the attorney to make those changes. You could do that on your own. And then that comes off the top. And then that's for the kind of stuff you don't want people swallowing over. So I've seen it all. I've seen families fighting over dish towels, the crazy stuff.
If you put the house in trust,
Yes.
and you have 2 children, how do they sell the house when they need to sell the house?
Okay. It's just as simple as you would otherwise. With that, they're able to go to the closing, and it says that they're the person who's able to sell it. They can list the house with the realtor. They can sign the deed, whoever the backup trustee is who's handling it. They can really do anything that an executor of an estate would be doing, or that you would be able to do while you were living. Does that help you understand a little bit better?
If you have a trust and you've left a substantial amount of money to your children, and let's say your children are married, but then your children passes, who does the trust go to?
Okay, the question was, well, if you're leaving to your children and the children aren't living when you pass, where does that go? Most people like for it to be worded so that it passes on to their children, if they have any children. You usually don't put the in-laws because they're likely to maybe remarry. And even though maybe they have the best intentions, their new spouse, if they remarry, might say, hey, let's go to my lawyer and we'll just do a simple will that leaves everything to each other. And then it might end up never going to the where it was intended to go. So we usually put it in there that it passes on to like the grandchildren, if there are any, and that share is divided among those children. Okay. So yes, sir. And I do want to start talking about the second half because I know we started a little bit late. So go ahead, sir.
You made a will when our kids was young, back to the lawyer, the fact of what happened in this case with my wife that died. Now, they're old enough now that they own family. Do we have to go back, redo that will again with that lawyer or basically we did back then?
So usually lawyers like to put a lot of backup plans in place so that it usually takes care of itself if you don't get around to going to a lawyer to have it updated. What I always tell people is I think it's a good idea to pull your will or your trust out every few years at least, and let's just take a look at it and see if anything has changed. Sometimes a lot of things might change. Somebody might start having a drug problem, and you want to put some safeguards in place or what have you. But usually we like to make it so it can pretty much take care of itself without having to go back and pay the lawyer for very many changes. So also, I want to talk about inheritance taxes. Inheritance taxes used to be a big problem that people had to worry about. We usually don't need to anymore. The laws have changed a lot with inheritance taxes. Indiana now no longer has inheritance taxes, state inheritance taxes. So I guess you could say, it ought to be on a billboard, Indiana's a good place to die, because you don't have to worry about that. Now, with federal inheritance taxes, those are needs to have to worry about. So people don't have that problem of federal inheritance taxes anymore, and I say a problem in air quotes, unless you have over $14 million. And that's not a bad problem to have, but most people don't have to worry about some of that headache that you have to worry about the more elaborate, and me saying elaborate, expensive estate planning that we really don't need for most people anymore. Now, I want to talk more about long-term care and asset protection and prenups. So, most people don't think about a prenup when they're young on their first marriage. It's when they've gotten bitten by that divorce with the first marriage, and they know how nasty things can get. And also they start acquiring some property, some retirement, and stuff that they didn't have when they were younger. Now, in Indiana, are all of you from Indiana, or do we have people from Illinois? So now I can't talk about what other states' laws are, because I'm only here in Indiana, but it gives you something good to be thinking about and talk with a lawyer in Illinois about what other state you live in. So in Indiana, the courts will take the property and they split it in half, and that's the starting point. And then the scale can spin a little bit either way, depending on some other factors, but that's usually the starting point. And they don't care. It doesn't matter who earned what, who inherited what, or what you had before you got married, what you came into the marriage with. A prenup gives you all that kind of control. So with that, you're able to tailor it to whatever works for you. You can say, well, what I had before, I want to set that aside and protect that for my kids from the previous marriage, maybe. But maybe everything that you earn together after getting married, you might share, or you might keep that separate too. It can really be whatever you talk about and whatever works for you. And I will tell you, I have seen a few couples that when they start talking about the prenup, it gives them a good idea of what that other person would be like as a person. And I have seen some people when they start talking about prenups realize maybe they weren't really a good fit to get married. Maybe one of them is more of a saver and the other is more of a spender, and it's an important financial discussion to be had. And I had a man once say to me, well, I'm about to get married and I want to go into it with an open heart. And I said, of course you do, but having an open heart doesn't mean you have to have an open wallet. So there's some things you can do to protect yourself. Now, blended families too. You want to talk with your lawyer about that and what your concerns are. Because, like I said, that person might get remarried and maybe they might go and see a lawyer and then everything gets left to the step-parent. And then your kids end up getting cut out completely. There are some things lawyers can do to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, I want to talk about keeping the estate intact also. When we look at, especially like family farms or small family businesses, in order to run a small business like that and keep it going, you need to keep it intact. And otherwise, if you split it up and divide it, usually the farm isn't going to be something that can function as a business any longer. You can talk with your lawyer about that too. There's some great solutions to that. I come from a long line of family farmers. My dad's one of 6 children. And what they did was they took the family farm and they turned it into a corporation. So it was able to be its own business, but yet everybody was still being treated fairly as shareholders of it. So there are some things you can do with that. Now, I want to talk with you about long-term care asset protection. And with that, we're talking about the needs of aging family. And you know what, I want to mention to you also, I don't think I have my phone number in that book, but I do have my contact info up here, my phone number, email address. If anybody ever has questions for me, you can pick up one of those. And also, what I usually like to do is I can send you my slides so that you can have that to look back on if you ever want to refresh your memory with it. So if anybody reaches out to me and says, hey, Jeff, can you send me a copy of the slides for this? I'm happy to do that. Now, when we're talking about long-term care, we're usually talking about assisted living and also nursing home care. And it's something that everybody has someone in the family who's going to be going through that. And we're all hopefully going to be going through that if we live long enough for that. But as we get older, we start seeing our health have more needs. So with that, we need to talk about some solutions of what we can do with that. With assisted living and skilled nursing, the cost of care is exorbitant. When we're talking about assisted living, we're usually looking at $3,500 to $5,000 a month. And with nursing homes, before COVID, it was $8,000 to $9,000. I've seen them going up to over $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 a month now. These places start nickel and diming you. When you do the simple math, you see how long that nest egg is going to last. There are some ways that we can protect that, though. There's some great planning tools. Long-term care insurance is fantastic when you're able to qualify for that. VA benefits really help a lot. Do we have any veterans in here? Because there is a lot you need to know that you can be eligible for. And also Medicaid. So I know I need to start talking a little bit faster. We're running out of time.
Just 3 more minutes. Just 3 more minutes.
Okay. So VA aid and attendance. For veterans, there are some great benefits out there many veterans don't know about. It's called the Aid and Attendance Program, and it could be a lot of money to be able to help you with that cost of care. I don't have time to give you a lot of the details, but if you tell me you want the slides, I'll send that to you with this list, and you can always call me with any questions that you've got about it. There are some things that you can do to plan for that. You need to plan maybe 3 years ahead of time. And sometimes we do some trust work to be able to get people qualified after the 3-year look-back period. Now, Medicaid is fantastic to help pay for this cost of care. The problem is it's really complicated. If somebody goes to a Medicaid office and files an application for Medicaid benefits, the Medicaid caseworker will just about all the time deny and say, hey, you got to come back when they've got less than $2,000 to their name. That's not the whole truth, though. There are a lot of things, tools that can be used that Medicaid elder law attorneys know about to be able to get people qualified for Medicaid benefits to help pay for the nursing home costs without losing everything. And some ways that we do that, we can do some carefully structured planning. We can do some family service contracts, some special types of trust work, Medicaid annuities, family promissory notes, and doing some spending on some things that the person might be needing. Now, types of Medicaid plans. Again, there's no one size fits all. To give you kind of an idea, though, if you do the planning early, at least 5 years before you need it, you can protect just about everything. And that's with some special type of trust work. Most people don't do the planning that early because you don't have that crystal ball to know what to look into. Now, if you've got emergency planning, when somebody has had a stroke, they've fallen, something has happened to where they have to go to the hospital, then to rehab, and they end up finding that they need to stay there in the nursing home for their care. In a case like that, and you haven't done any planning, we can usually protect at least half of everything. You just want to ask your attorney about what can be done with that. There's a lot that can be done. Not all attorneys know what this is, though. So you want to make sure you go to an elder law attorney who does work with Medicaid. There aren't that many who do that kind of work, and you've got to really stay on top of the laws to make sure you don't mess up with it. If we've got a case where we've got a married couple, and one spouse goes into the nursing home, but the other is still living at home, those are beautiful cases. I can usually protect everything for the spouse who's still living at home. Now, I know our time is up. I hope I was able to at least answer some of your questions, but you know what? If you want to get my contact info and then give me a call or shoot me an email, I'm happy to talk with any of you about any questions that you might have.
You're not gonna started it off with an activity, which is really good. I know some more people are coming in. So come on in as I start with the introduction of today's topic, which is emotional intelligence. Now, y'all know we don't have microphones, so I'm gonna try to speak as loud as I can, but if you need me to repeat something, just let me know, and I will be sure to do so. All right. We started off with this activity. Some people had an emotion on their back, and the objective of this activity, this opening activity, was to try to guess what emotion you're wearing. So raise your hand in here if you had the emotion on your back. I want to ask you a few questions. I'll ask you, was it hard for you to guess your emotion? No, why not?
The person was talking to me, she gave me a look like she was very disappointed.
She said it wasn't hard because the woman gave her a look, and that look told her the answer. How many of us know that you can communicate without saying a word? Yeah? So that helped? Yeah? Who else wants to share their experience? Yes? No, I don't.
It was easy because we really know each other's kind of relationship. She evoked the emotion. I guessed it right.
There we go. She said it was easy because they had a relationship. You're right.
And the same with me.
And then the same. So if you have a relationship with somebody, there's sometimes some unspoken language that happens, right? Absolutely. Now, who had a hard time? Who was a little bit difficult? Yep. So she said that they were using medical terms. They're asking, is your blood pressure low? How many of us know that the words that we use can either help or hurt us understand the message? Yeah? So that happened with her. Who else wants to share? What up? Yeah.
I had embarrassed. That's hard to do because it helped us to understand the context.
He said he had embarrassed, and it was hard because if you don't have the context, then you might not be able to understand the message. How many of us in here know that the context really paints a clearer picture when it comes to communicating messages? Yes? One more person. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to share about our youth because all they do is text all the time, and a lot of them don't know expression when a person is sad and disappointed because they're not used to seeing expressions on people's faces, and they're losing that, and that's so sad. My heart just ache for them. You know, even going on an interview, they're interviewing. You know, a lot of times they don't know how to eye contact. It's important. They don't know how to keep that eye contact, so they're losing all of that.
They are. Yeah, I'm hearing there's a generational gap in communication, right? Because if our youth is talking to other youth, they don't have no communication gap. But if we are talking to somebody from a different generation, there could be some lapses in messages, right? Back and forth. So I wanted to start off with this activity. All right, one more.
When I was at a young lady that I was trying to help her guess the word, and I was trying to look sorry, and I wouldn't look at it, and I said, oh, everybody knows what I did, and she got words like embarrassed, but she never got ashamed.
So then, and I think that could be an example of a generational gap as well, because not everybody has the same vocabulary. Not everybody has the same understanding of the words. Exactly. Kind of go hand in hand. That was a good one. Thank you. So I like to do this activity because, one, it's a really good example on how to practice empathy. We talk about it all the time, but not often do you actually have to put yourself in the emotions of somebody else to guess what is it that they're feeling. And if you're the one that had to guess your emotion, you had to practice expressing and receiving empathy. And then so it's hard to know what your emotion is sometimes. It's also hard to communicate. So today, we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence. I am Tom Severt. My company is Amani Enterprises. I'm an executive coach, business consultant, and I've done work all around the globe, and I've taught this class around the globe. And I'm going to let you all know, and preface this by saying this is like a 4 to 8 hour course that I have tried to cram to the best of my ability in this 45, 50 minutes that I have with y'all. So it's going to be a lot of information, but I tried to break it down as much as I can. Yes? Oh yeah, you can turn the lights down as well. Is that better? Okay. Well, not all of it. Turn it up just a little bit. All right, so we're talking about emotional intelligence, For those of you who do not know, emotional intelligence is a real skill, and it's a book. It's a book written by Drs. Travis Berry and Gene Graves, and this book is phenomenal. It comes with, and when I teach this full course, it comes with a copy of the book. Inside of the book, you're actually able to take an assessment to get what your emotional intelligence score is. It's not the same as IQ. Scientists in the world nowadays are calling EQ for emotional intelligence. And the theory behind emotional intelligence has been adapted by the Navy. It's been adapted in corporate America. It's been adapted in churches. And I will tell you now that the information that you learned today, if you allow it, will transform the way you view yourself, view your communication with others, and transform the relationships that you have. But before we get into the different quadrants of emotional intelligence, I want to talk to you about what it is scientifically. What is emotional intelligence physically? So I'm a big neuroscience nerd. I love the science of how the brain works, because when you look at the science, it's really not, it's not up for debate. This is scientifically proven. This is how we as humans process information. All messages that we receive first hit our primitive brain. That's located in the back of our brain. This is where we find emotion. This is where we feel. So every message that we get, every message that we receive, the first thing that our brain does is have a feeling about it. And then that message moves to your prefrontal cortex, which is located at the front of your brain. And this is where we find meaning. This is where we find logic. So what does this mean? This means that as humans, raise your hand in here if you're a human. So as humans, we feel before we think. We feel emotion before we find logic. That is how our brains are wired. So if you're talking to somebody and they're what people say stuck in their feelings, give them grace. Because that's how the brain is wired. It takes time for that message to move and get to the prefrontal cortex where you find logic. Why is emotional intelligence important? Well, because emotional intelligence helps bridge the gap. It puts both of these things together. It takes what you feel and the logic behind that message and puts them together, which will help you in your relationships with yourself, your relationships with your loved ones, your family, your spouses, your church members, your brothers and your sisters. Emotional intelligence will help aid you in having productive, fruitful relationships. So that's what it is. Now, like I said earlier, emotional intelligence is broken down into 4 parts. I'm going to share each of these parts with you. We'll give some examples. You'll be able to watch some good videos. So let's talk about the first part. The first quadrant of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. Okay? The definition is here on the screen. Self-awareness is the ability to accurately recognize your emotions as they happen and understand your general tendencies for responding to different people and different situations. I think it's so powerful in emotional intelligence that the first quadrant is dealing with who? Yourself. Before you can check anybody else, you gotta look within yourself and check yourself. It always starts with you, right? So self-awareness is taking a moment to say, how am I feeling right now? What is my emotion right now? Why am I so triggered, right? Self-awareness is also, do I know how I'm looking right now? Am I aware of my facial expressions? Because we heard it earlier, the way that you look communicates way more than the words that you say. Science shows, and there's a study done by UCLA that says that of all of communication, I think it's 7 or 8% of communication are the words that we say. 95 to 96% of communication is all of the other stuff. It's that nonverbal communication, those the way that you look, your body expressions, that communicates the message. Not so much the words. How many of us have been in a conversation or an argument and somebody says, no, I heard you say, blah, blah, blah. That's not what I said. Those aren't the words that came out of my mouth, but that's what they received. We got to be cognizant of how we look. Are we self-aware of ourselves, right? I want to play a video that I think is going to spark some good conversation. Check this out.
Why are you surprised me? Miss Spain has got nothing to do with you. I'm sorry, Amy, I don't understand. Why can't you just leave us alone? You're older than us, you can do whatever you want. Amy, I'm sorry. What is it that I can do that you can't? Go anywhere, anytime. You can take him. Take who? Look, just leave us to ourselves. It's not fair if we can't have something of our own.
Now, I like this video because you have no context if you have not seen this video. By the way, that was Nicole Kidman from like back in the day, right? Anyway, so in this video, raise your hand if you think the teacher knew what Nicole Kidman was talking about. No. Now, Nicole Kidman could have very well been aware of how she was feeling, but not aware of how she was showing up, right? Not aware that the person she was talking to had no idea what she was talking about. So the lapses in self-awareness speak volumes, even though the actions might be subtle. Nicole Kidman wasn't yelling, she didn't go in the room throwing stuff and raising her voice. She was speaking regularly, but there is a gap there. You gotta be able to recognize, how am I feeling, right? What am I triggered by? And then how can I communicate this to the person I'm speaking? There's an activity, if we had time, where I would ask you a few questions, right? We would break up into groups, and then I would ask you to think about a time that you lost it. Now, we're not going to be able to do this activity in full today, but I think in your seats, to yourself, I'm going to run you through these questions, and I want for you to follow them and to answer them in your mind, okay? So take a minute to think about a time when you lost your composure, or when you overreacted to a situation, or held your tongue and suffered the consequences, okay? I want for you to think of that situation. I'm going to ask you a few questions about that. Hopefully we have a situation locked in our brains. Think about what led up to that event. What triggered it? Did somebody say something? Did somebody do something? What were those external factors that contributed to you losing? Think about that. Now I want for you to think about how did you react? What did you say? What did you not say? And why? Why did you say what you said? Why did you not say what you said? And if you think about that why, I want you to think, is that why rooted in logic? Or was that why rooted in emotion? That answer out loud, just think about it. I want for you to think about what was the outcome after you said what you said or didn't say what you didn't say. What was the outcome? How did you feel afterwards? Think about what else you could have done. Hopefully, you had a situation where you had to ask yourself these questions. The reason I'm doing this activity is because these questions can help guide that message from your prefrontal cortex from your primitive brain to your prefrontal cortex, where you find that logic, where you find that meaning. I'll give you a good example of, now I am a person that really doesn't lose my composure. I don't really get too upset, right? I'm the person that more so implodes. I don't really speak out loud. But there have been times where I felt, to my standard, that I've lost my composure. And when I take a moment to sit down and to ask myself these questions, the main question that always helps me shift my perspective is, what else could be true? What else could be true? I am upset at this person, but what else could be true? Somebody cut me off in traffic and I just want to whoop. But what else could be true? There could be an emergency, right? Ask yourself what else can be true. Extend grace. We got to keep moving. So that's the first one, is self-awareness. I want for you to turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, are you self-aware?
Are you self-aware?
Now let's look at what the Bible has to say about being self-aware. Though good advice lies deep within the heart, a person with understanding will draw it out. My dad says all the time, in all thy getting, understand yourself, right? I can't wait till I get to this next part, because it's really transformative. But you gotta understand yourself. You gotta understand what your triggers are. You gotta understand what makes me upset. Why does that make me upset? And does that have anything to do with the person I'm upset with, right? Ask yourself those questions. Self-awareness requires digging deeper than just reacting to emotions, right? It's about recognizing why you feel what you feel and choosing to understand your own motives and your own patterns. Check yourself first. All right, let's move on. So we talked about self-awareness. I want to talk about the next one, which is self-management. Turn to your neighbor and say, neighbor, do you manage yourself? Absolutely. So it's not only enough to be self-aware. I know I'm upset. And when you get your emotional intelligence scores, if you ever have the privilege of doing the full course, you'll see that you have 4 different scores. One for each quadrant, right? Somebody can have very high self-awareness. I know I'm mad. And I know I don't like it. And I know I don't want to be here. And they can have very poor self-management, right? So let's talk about what self-management is and the definition of it. Self-management is using the awareness of your emotions to choose what you say and do in order to, what? Positively direct the outcome. Yeah. So it's not just enough to say, I am aware of how I feel. How do you manage yourself? And part of managing yourself is all of that communication that we talked about in the opening. I'm aware of my facial expressions. And guess what? It's okay if you're not. When I teach this class, I get questions all the time. Some say, I just have that kind of face. I know that I just have the face that looks like, and I can't help it. Guess what? That's fine. First, you're self-aware about it. Second, communicate that to the people that you work with, to the people that you have relationships with. Communicate to them. If you ever see me looking like, please don't take it personal. My face just does what it does sometimes. Create that space to communicate to them who you are. Yes? So that's self-management. Now, let's get into what a lot of self-management looks like. I'm gonna play a video clip for you all. You can already tell, right?
First day?
Yes.
I'll take care of her.
Thank you.
You know, kindergarten is like the ocean. You don't want to turn your back on it.
Say okay. Don't worry. Everything is under control.
Aren't you going to break it up? No, 2 more days of this, and you'll quit.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Don't do this.
We're gonna stop it right there for a second time. So, who can tell me what they saw in this video? Lack of self conference, so some of us in here have grandkids. Have you ever felt that way? I'm an uncle, and I know I have. I used to teach in the school system, and I felt that way. But here's the thing one thing I want to point out, is that we really should be mindful of our intent against our impact, right? So in this movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger, what do you think his intent was? To get the classroom to be quiet, right? His intent was to restore order. His intent was to say, can I have your attention? Was his intent to make the kids cry? No. What was the impact? It's very possible that in this world that we live in, the way that our brains work, what we do and what we say can create an opposite impact of what our intent was. And when that happens, the answer is not to say, you're wrong, you shouldn't have took it that way, I'm not going to apologize. We know how our brain works. What's the first thing that we do when we receive a message? We have a feeling about it. Sometimes that feeling gets stuck. As a matter of fact, let's go back to that, right? Let's go back to it. This is that model, right? Our primitive brain, feeling, prefrontal cortex, where we find the meaning. This message, scientists say it takes 3 seconds on average. Now, some messages in some people it can be faster. Some messages in some people it can be a lot longer. But on average, it's 3 seconds for that message to move from your primitive to your prefrontal cortex. When it does that, it has to pass what's called an amygdala. Okay? Now, the amygdala is the shape of a walnut. And this amygdala's only job, this is science, this is not an opinion. The amygdala's job is to scan and analyze the information that it receives and compare it to your experiences to see if there's danger. This is where biases come from, right? I know my past, my experiences, my amygdala is telling me that red equals blood. And whenever I see red, I don't like it. Red equals a crip. Whenever I see red, I don't like it. Somebody else is wearing red. They're not the problem. It's your amygdala telling you red is not okay, right? That's how the amygdala works. Now, when that happens, scientists call this an amygdala attack, okay? That means that that message is stuck. It can't get to the logic yet. It is stuck. Sometimes it can be stuck for hours. Sometimes it can be stuck for days. Sometimes it can be stuck for months, years. You see this in grief, right? It can be stuck in that amygdala. I am stuck in grief. But with time and with God, that message can move to your prefrontal cortex where you find the logic. That's why when people get upset sometimes they punch a hole in the wall, right? And then afterwards, when that message moves, they'll say, I don't know why I did that. I was so upset, I just saw red and I overreacted. It really ain't that deep. That message was able to move. Self-awareness. Check yourself and see, am I having an amygdala attack right now? I'm really upset. I really want to lash out. I feel some kind of way. But before I say anything to you, let me be self-aware. Let me know how I feel. Let me make sure I'm managing myself. I might be having an amygdala attack. Now might not be the good time to respond, right? I might want to take a beat before I respond. I'm gonna tell you a story. This is about my mom. This is the point where I think I might have had a little bit of an amygdala attack. So I was moving out of the house, going to college, right? Moving into my place, and she was helping me. Now, as an 18, 17-year-old young man, I was ready to have my own place. I was ready to be out. I was ready to be independent. And she said, I'm gonna help you move. I said, okay, great, let's go. Y'all, all day long, my mom was being so, I love you. She was being so bossy. She was being so demanding. And I was just holding my tongue, waiting for the evening to come, because she'll go home, and I have my place all to myself. So I'm going along with it. Our last stop was to get some groceries. She said, you know, I'm gonna get you some food. We're gonna stock your refrigerator. I'm gonna cook dinner and I'm gonna stay the night. And then I'll leave in the morning. You see that? Amygdala attack. Having an amygdala attack. I said to her, and I normally never really say no, like just in life. I'm a people person, just kind of whatever it is. I said no that time. I said, no, you're not. No. I said, I thank you for your help. I got it from here. You can go home and everything will be fine. So she's in the grocery store and I go out to get the car and pull it around. I feel valid. I feel affirmed in my decision and what I was feeling. I felt good. I hadn't quite gotten to the logic of the situation until my dad called. And my dad said, how you doing, son? I said, I'm good. I'm good, you know, ready for the day to be over and just gonna have my place. And he said, you know your mother wants to stay the night. And I said, yeah, and I told her no. And he said to me, he said, what you don't know is that behind your back all day, she's been crying. She's been calling me. You're her last baby boy. You're the last kid to leave the house, and she's taking it hard. I just want to let you know that. That was what I needed to get that message out of my amygdala, to find the meaning, to find the logic. She wasn't really being bossy. That's what I perceived it as. But what she was going through a life transition, just like I was. But I was so stuck in my emotion. I was so stuck in my amygdala that I could not find the logic of what she was going through. And of course, when I came to that realization, she stayed the night and everything was all good. That's an example of an amygdala attack. And I'm sure that as you all are sitting in this room now, you can think of a time where you might have had one of these, right? And after time, when you got into the logic, you've realized maybe that wasn't the best decision. Emotional intelligence teaches you to take a beat, take a moment before you respond, before you say something. How am I feeling? Am I self-aware? Am I able to manage myself, right? Those are the two qualities. What does the Bible say about self-management? I like this scripture. But the Holy Spirit, y'all know this, right? Produces this kind of fruit in our lives: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and what? And self-control. Are you able to control yourself? And it's not just about against temptation. It's about against yourself, against your own emotions. Because that sometimes is what really gets us. That's that self-management piece. All right, I got to keep moving with my time. Okay, shoot. All right, so then there's an activity that I would like to do that my sister kind of stole in her presentation, where she speaks, and I know we disconnected that way. We didn't talk about it. But there's a negative phrase, and you have to train your brain on how to say that, but positive. Use proactive language, because we are all response-able, free to choose how we respond, free to choose how we show up, right? But we're not going to do that. I want to ask you instead, how do you manage yourself? And I want some volunteers, because we can all learn from each other. In a stressful situation, what are some things that you do to make sure that you're not acting out in an amygdala attack? What are some things? I mean, yes?
I use Proverbs 51, a soft answer turns away wrath.
Did y'all hear that? Proverbs 51, 15:1. A soft answer turns away.
Read his words, stir up.
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. Yes, yes. And we saw that earlier in the mental health segment about box breathing, controlling the senses. Yes. I'm happy you said that. I do that a lot. I do soft answers, and for some people, it stirs them up even more. Because Okay, so here's the thing about our brains, right? Our brains have what's called a mirror neuron, which means if I see something scientifically, my brain kind of wants to react the same way. And if there's a gap in that mirror neuron, some people get agitated. Some people get hyped. So for example, if I see somebody throw up, I might want to throw up. If I see somebody cry, I might want to cry. Those are those mirror neurons into effect. Sometimes when we're communicating with other people and they're on 10 and we're still on 1, they're expecting those mirror neurons. They're expecting to see what they give, and you're not giving them that. When you experience that, right, extend grace and know that it's their response is not your cross to bear. It's not your responsibility, right? And you can communicate to them. This is how I communicate. Yeah. I think that's a great question, and I feel like within everything, Dr. James would probably be better to answer this clinically, but I feel like within everything, there's always a spectrum. So to say people with a personality disorder are always self-aware or always not self-aware wouldn't be a good blanket answer. But what I would say is that if they are self-aware or not, that is not your cross to bear. The best thing that you can do is to communicate your boundaries, communicate who you are, communicate how you communicate. This is my speaking style. And guess what? If you don't like it, if it doesn't work for you, I love you anyway. And it's okay. You don't have to. Or maybe we can come back and visit this conversation on another day, because what do we know about the human brains? Right? We feel before we find logic. So me trying to have a conversation with you in this moment and get you to understand me in this moment might fail. Yes.
You know, one of the things I do consider the impact of my actions before, if I have, like you said, that I forgot to get that.
Amygdala. Absolutely. He said he considers the impact of his actions. That's going back to that impact versus intent, right? I know what my intent is, but how can I make sure the impact is in alignment? One more.
So how harmful is it when I'm the part where I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to internalize it and just keep it. So how harmful is that?
We're going to get to that at the end. So happy you brought that up. That's good. We'll get to that. That's part of the quadrants, and we'll talk about it. All right. Let's move on for the sake of time. So turn to your neighbor and say,
Our purpose of building strong communities and driving inclusive economic.
I don't know. Turn to your neighbor and say, are you self-aware? Can you manage yourself? And are you socially aware? That's the third quadrant, social awareness. So just to kind of run it back. First, I'm self-aware. I know how I feel about myself. I'm aware of my emotions. I'm aware of what triggers me. I'm aware of how I show up. I can manage myself. I have self-control. I can manage where that I'm looking. But are you socially aware? Are you able to walk into a room and pick up on the vibe? Are you able to see this person might not be in a state to receive the message I'm trying to give them? Yeah, that's social awareness. So let's go into the definition of that, and I'll show you what it looks like. Social awareness is recognizing and understanding the emotions and perspectives of others. That does not mean that you are in agreement. It means that I recognize we have different lives, different life stories, different backgrounds that have contributed to who we are. And that is your understanding of the situation. And your understanding of how you feel is your understanding of how you feel. And I don't have to say anything wrong about it. I can accept that for you. And you should be able to accept that for me. That mine is different as well, right? So let's talk about, let's see what this looks like. I have, this is a good video from the Dick Van Dyke Show. I'm trying to make my time. Okay, we're gonna move on. In this video though, he doesn't pick up on social cues and he brings himself into a freeze, right? Being able to pick up on those social cues are important. I do want to do this though. I want for you to turn to somebody next to you and I want for y'all to talk about these two right here. How has your social circles changed over time? And what have those changes taught you about understanding others' emotions? And then can you think of a moment when somebody misunderstood your feelings or intentions? What do you think, what do you wish you would have been able to do differently? I'm gonna give you 2 minutes to discuss this in pairs with the person next to you. And you can turn the lights on if you can, just to kind of bring it down. Since I got a little bit more time, I'm gonna play this video for y'all.
As soon as I get back, you gotta come really work on those teeth. How do your teeth feel, Rob? Any sensitivities?
Well, not at the moment. No, I mean, they're perfect. That's what I don't know why you're checking them. They're so good.
Gonna check them just to make sure. I probably did too good a job on your last card. All right. Open.
Check the top first.
Fine, Rob.
Mine, not fine. They're very sensitive when I eat anything. That's my thing. My text. Ooh. That's right. You're very sensitive. You better explain. Take your time.
Come on, Rob. Enough of that. What's with you?
All right. All right, I'll tell you what's with me. Jerry? I'm a louse.
A louse?
Yeah, I don't know what else you'd call a person to do the disloyal and rotten thing I did.
What disloyal and rotten thing?
Would you like to see what rotten and disloyal? I'll show you what rotten and disloyal thing I did.
What?
I said I went to another dentist, but I never got my teeth.
Why did you feel you had to go to another dentist?
So I broke his tooth there. I went to another guy to work on it.
Well, there's nothing so disloyal about attending to an emergency.
Okay. That was an emergency. But I can't, well, there, can I let him work on that?
You let him work on another tooth?
Yeah, now you see what I mean. You see what kind? Rip them up, Jerry. Oh, just everything out of the gun. I'm speaking my tongue so I can curse myself, Jerry.
Listen, Ron, you did the only thing you could in an emergency. I'm just glad you went to him and had your teeth fixed.
You mean you're not mad at me?
I'm not mad at you. I mean, I would be, but you're so busy being mad at yourself that I can't.
You forgive me?
Yeah, I forgive you.
Yeah? Yeah, you know something? You're a great guy. You know, I'll tell you one thing.
That was it. So let's talk about this video really quick. How many of you used to watch the show? So let's talk about what we saw in this video. Was he being socially aware in the dentist chair at first? No? I'm not. Why wasn't he? Yeah, he didn't want to tell the truth at first. He was so busy thinking that the dentist was going to be mad at him that he didn't take a chance to look and see if the dentist was mad at him. Being socially aware isn't just about you have to have empathy. It's about figuring out and seeing and picking up on the cues of other people. I'll give you a personal testimony. I was in London doing a workshop, and this workshop was super high energy. Super music, fun. We had a little beach ball that we would throw around. Like it was supposed to be really interactive. And I had a participant come in and sit at my table. And when I tell you, like, he sat down, he folded his arms, he ain't say a word in this whole 2-day workshop. He didn't say a word the whole day. Now, me being the good facilitator that I am, I try to bring him in to the conversation. I try to ask him, well, what do you think? I try to involve him into the activities of the day. He's not budgeting, right? So I'm being socially aware. I figure that this guy is just a jerk. And I am not going to let this jerk ruin my day. So I'm going to turn my back to him. I'm not going to give him any energy, and I'm going to cut him out. And that's what I did. That's what I did. At the end of the day, he comes up to me, and he says this. He says, I just want to let you know that I had such a great time today. It was a really good and insightful, and I know that I might not have looked like it, but it's because I just had a stroke. And today is my first day back at work, and I didn't want to overextend myself, and so I was just really taking it all in, but I really, really appreciated everything that you did today. How do you think I felt? I felt horrible. If I would have took a moment to ask myself what else could be true other than he's a jerk, what else could be true, I would have been able to extend grace, to continue to extend grace to him throughout the entire presentation. So ask yourself, even when you're trying to be socially aware and you're picking up on cues that might not look like they're trying to be a positive impact in the relationship, before you write them out, before you say, oh, before you do that, ask yourself, what else can be true about them, right? What else might they be going through that's causing them to show up this way? And how can I extend grace to them in that situation? How can I show love to them in that situation? How can I not exclude them, but respect their boundaries in that situation? All of that is part of socially awareness, of being socially aware. All right? We're going to keep it moving because we got some good stuff. So, what does the scripture say about social awareness? Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Right? God is calling for us to be socially aware, to extend grace, to feed into the relationships that we have with other people. And nowhere in here does it say that you should be selfless and that you should act this way if the person acts that way towards you. This is not a conditional requirement. This is who we are called to be. We're called to be selfless, to count them above ourselves, to give and to show love regardless of how they look and show love towards us, right? That's social awareness. Very good, very good. All right, and then we have one more. This is a good one. I want to say these points real quick too. This scripture is calling for us to be aware of when our pride or our self-focus might get in the way. And it's easy. The way that our brain works, it's so easy. It's so easy to be stuck in how you're looking at it. Stuck in your perception. Stuck in your own feelings. It's so easy. You gotta put yourself aside. It's also calling for the practice of empathy by turning into others' realities. What might be true for them? What could they have gone through in their life? What traumas might they have experienced that is causing them to show up the way that they're showing up now? And are you providing grace for them? Are you showing love to them in spite of it? And then treat people as worthy of attention and care, and not just as background characters in your own story, right? And that's what the scripture is calling for us. Very good. All right, we have one more quadrant, so let's run it all back. Ask your neighbor, say, are you self-aware?
Are you self-aware?
Can you manage yourself?
Can you manage yourself?
Are you socially aware?
Are you socially aware?
And then lastly is relationship management. I'm gonna tell you this, when I learned about emotional intelligence, when I got certified, I already just knew that my emotional intelligence scores were through the roof. I just knew it. I went into it and I was like, oh, now listen, I know I am in control of what I feel. I know I'm in control. I've always been in control of what I am portraying to other people. I know I can pick up on the emotions of other people. But lo and behold, when I got my score, my relationship management was so low. I'm going to tell you how this can be, but before I do, I want to get into the definition of relationship management. It's using the awareness of your emotions and the emotions of others to manage interactions successfully. Now, I know before I told you all that I'm the kind of avoidant. I'm an avoidant person when it comes to conflict resolution. Right? I'm a people person. I'm a people pleaser. Not always do I communicate my boundaries. Not always do I communicate what I feel. In order to have high relationship management scores, not only do you have to be in connection with what you're feeling and how you move, you got to be able to communicate that to the person that you are in relationships with, right? You got to be able to stand up for yourself in a way that manages that relationship. Otherwise, you are a bystander in that relationship. If you're not showing up, if you're not communicating your preferences, your boundaries, how you communicate, if you're not showing up and communicating that in the relationship, then you are a bystander. You're not active. And the person has a relationship with themselves, pretty much. You have to be able to show up for yourself. Use your awareness of your emotions, your awareness of how you feel, of your triggers, and communicate that to the person that you are in a relationship with. Use your social awareness skills. Use what you've picked up about them, combining them all together to manage your relationship effectively, right? I have a great clip that can kind of embody this better than anything I can say. So I'm gonna get to it. Yes, I'm gonna hold up.
I've been sitting out there for the last half hour trying to come up with a story that would explain my being here dressed like this. And I wanted to come up with a story that would demonstrate qualities that I'm sure you all admire here, like earnestness or diligence and team playing to something. And I couldn't think of anything. So the truth is, I was arrested for failure to pay parking tickets. Parking tickets? And I ran all the way here from the Polk station, the police station.
What were you doing before you were arrested?
I was painting my apartment.
Is it dry now?
I hope so.
Kay says you're pretty determined.
Oh, he's been waiting outside the front of the building with some 40-pound gizmo for over a month.
He said you're smart.
I'd like to think so.
And you want to learn this business?
Yes, sir, I want to learn this business.
Have you already started learning on your own?
Absolutely.
Jack,
Yes, sir.
how many times have you seen Chris?
No, I don't know. One too many, apparently.
Is he ever dressed like this?
No. No. Jacket and tie.
First in your class? In school? High school?
Yes, sir.
How many in the class?
12. It's a small town.
Awesome.
But I was also first in my radar class in the Navy, and that was a class of 20. Can I say something? I'm the type of person, if you ask me a question and I don't know the answer, I'm going to tell you that I don't know. But I bet you what? I know how to find the answer, and I will find the answer. Is that fair enough?
Chris, what would you say if a guy walked in for an interview without a shirt on? And I hired him. What would you say?
He must have had on some really nice pants.
I really like this video because it shows all of these quadrants of emotional intelligence. Right? Was he self-aware in this clip? Yeah? How so? Somebody tell me. How do we see self-awareness?
He wasn't dressed appropriately for an interview.
He knew that he wasn't dressed appropriately for the interview. Was he socially aware as well? He knew, sitting across from those guys, he knew, okay, let me say, I've been trying to think about how I can explain my appearance to you, because he was socially aware. He was even more socially aware later on when he said, let me say this. If you ask me a question and I don't know, I'm gonna tell you I don't know. So I'll find out the answer. He said that because he was socially aware to see that they weren't like my enemy, right? How did he manage himself? Did he show good self-management? Absolutely. He walked in, did he allow his appearance to stop him from shaking everybody's hand? Did he allow his appearance to stop him from speaking eloquently? He did not. He used all of these quadrants to manage the relationship. And if you haven't seen the movie, spoiler alert, he got the job. Yeah, and his life changed. When you practice effective emotional intelligence, all of these quadrants, you are going to enhance the relationships that you have, which will enhance the legacies that you have. It will allow you to be intentional about how you show up in the lives of those around you. It will allow you to be intentional about your internal feelings, right? And all of this study showed helps with your longevity, stress, mental health, and balance. So that's all I have for you, almost all I have. One last thing. Let's look at what the scripture says about relationship management. The scripture says, always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your what? Love. Because of your love, right? This is NIV version. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. I want to tell you this. If you root your relationships, and if your relationships are rooted in the love of Christ, then you will have and you will display emotional intelligence. If you root it in love, then you'll find grace. If you root it in love, then you'll find patience. If you root it in love, then you will find all of the fruits of the Spirit. If you root your relationships in love. So this is emotional intelligence. Like I said, I tried to cram an 8-hour course in the time that we have for today. But if you are interested in learning more about emotional intelligence, getting the book along with the course for maybe you, your family, your churches or the ones that work alongside of, you can scan the QR code. It will take you to my website where you can book a consultation and we'll be able to talk about how to assist you forward more so. Before we close, are there any questions about emotional intelligence? Yes. Now, when you say abusive, what does that mean? So I would say in any situation, if you're in a situation where somebody is abusive, then I would say there needs to be distance. Right? Now I'm not a licensed counselor. I am not a member of law enforcement, so I cannot provide you with legalities of steps that you should take. But I would say, like I said earlier, you can only carry your cross and control you. And others, if they are not there yet, extend them grace and distance yourself. And let them know that when they're ready, you're ready. But you can't always force people to act. You can't always force people to follow suit. You can't force people to grow up. You can't force people to heal. You gotta allow grace, you gotta allow grace, and give it time. That's how I handle it. No? Any questions? Are we good? No, I'm over time.